Hey guys, welcome back to We Met at Acme. I'm so excited to be here with Vashtie. Hi.
Hi.
So, what is your favorite romantic gesture?
My favorite romantic gesture, I think, is someone like when people can anticipate a need that you didn't realize you had. I know that might sound a little strange, or basic, but I feel like also I should clarify, I don't think that anyone is in charge of your own happiness. Like, you need to be in charge of your own happiness. But I like it, especially with my husband. He has this great way of sort of knowing what I'll need before I know it. And a really good example of that is last year I was really busy. Like, my morning to night was hectic. I had a shoot, meetings, went to DJ, and then had to run home, change, hair, makeup, and attend some gala event. And I was on my way home and I was in a car and I was just like so tired and so hungry, because often at these gorgeous, stunning gala events, the food is quite minimal.
Mm-hmm.
So I came home and he had a vegan pizza waiting and Sex and the City just on the TV ready to go. And I was like, I'm so happy. Like, this is all I need right now.
That sounds like a dream. And it's a real testament to how well someone knows you.
Yes.
And of course, like, we can't expect people to read our minds, but when we have a partner for that long, they should anticipate some of our needs, like little things like that.
Totally. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So before we get into your relationship, which I love because your partner's a Libra, I'm a Libra, you know, we love Libras.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about Vashtie. Like, I know you're DJing now, you've done modeling. You, I feel like, were the original influencer, but not like the way that it is today, but like streetwear, cool girl, like in the, you know, cool magazines. We kind of bonded at this coterie event because I was talking to you about how I used to work at Mass Appeal, and you were like the name that got thrown around all the time, like as like, oh, we got to do a piece on Vashtie. Like, do you see what Vashtie's doing? What kind of collabs? So how did you fall into all of that?
Wow. Well, thank you, first of all. I feel like I fell into it because those were my natural, authentic interests. Like, I grew up in the hood, upstate Albany, not New York City. A lot of people think I'm a New Yorker, but I'm not. But I grew up just upstate, like obsessed with hip hop, streetwear, sneakers, skate culture, going to hardcore shows. Like, I was a real weird mix of a kid who liked all these strange and cool, interesting things. So when I moved to New York, I just kind of copied what I was doing before. I'm a typical tourist. I like to do the same thing over and over. I like to have a routine. So when I moved to New York City for film school, I basically copied my all of my routines that I had upstate to New York. So it was like going to the local record shop, hanging out at the local skate shop, which happened to be Supreme, and, you know, like doing all the things that I knew were a part of me, just doing it naturally in New York. And I think, you know, by living authentically to who I was able to immerse myself into these cultures. And as my career evolved, I think I just sort of took those interests with me and was fortunate enough to like meet the right people and connect and collaborate. And I think it was sort of like this real natural journey.
Yeah. How do you know if you just are someone who like loves music, or you're someone who like knows music as well, like as a DJ? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. I think I grapple with that. I'm like, do I love music or do I know music? Like, I think ultimately I feel like I do know music. I think times are changing, and with that, trends are changing. And as much as good music is everlasting and classic, there is sort of an element of having to change with the trends yourself, evolve in order to stay on top of like whatever it is your interest is. I think most people just love music and sort of know music. And I think there are a lot of people who probably know music better than they think that could have a career within that field that maybe haven't tapped into it. But I think for me, I feel like I know music. I do. And I love music. I mean, I could talk about music forever, and it's just all across the board of any kind of genre.
Yeah, that's awesome. But being in this scene, like, you must have been around all kinds of potential romantic partners before you found and met your husband. What kind of relationships were you like in and out of when you were younger and, you know, new to the city?
So it's so funny. I was talking to a friend of mine who's single, and I did a review of my life and realized that I didn't start dating. I got into a relationship at the age of 14. And since having been in that relationship, I'd only been single for 4 years and I've just been in back-to-back long-term, like committed relationships. So like one relationship for all of high school, one for all of college, and then one for after college. Like it was just sort of like this.
Like serial monogamy.
Exactly, yeah. So I think when I was in my single phase, which is before I met my husband, but before my husband and I got together, we were actually friends for a long time. Yeah, it was like I had gone from being closed off to maybe dating within my field and then being kind of open, you know, like this is how you meet people at work. And I happen to work with interesting, creative people. And I think being single, and I'm sure a lot of single folks out there might identify with this, it was a strange time. But I think, you know, what I found was that I just prefer to be in just committed monogamous relationships.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
I wonder if you have, like, do you know your moon sign or your rising sign?
My moon is Sagittarius, I think.
Oh, interesting.
And my rising, I want to say, is Libra.
Yeah, you must have Libra in your chart because Libras like love being in long-term relationships.
Yeah.
Like, just love being in relationships in general.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then so you were friends with your husband before you started dating. How did you become friends?
Yes. So actually he's from Copenhagen, and in 2011 a production company, not a production, sorry, it was an agency that was coming to New York City from Copenhagen that was filming a sort of documentary on tastemakers, because at that era, I'm sure you might remember, people who were influential weren't influencers. Well, that's a whole different term for a whole different category of people, but influential people of that era were called tastemakers.
Tastemakers are like it girls.
Exactly, yeah. So they were doing a sort of documentary about people in streetwear who had influenced the culture. I was on the list because I had also just recently designed the Jordan. And so basically they reached out to me via email, and they were like, you know, we've interviewed a couple of your other peers and we would love to interview you. And I was like, okay, sure. And they came to my apartment, and looking back on that, I'm like, that's very bold to have a crew come to your apartment that you haven't met yet. But they came over, and he was with the agency, and we just met, and I was like, wow, he's like, I just kind of felt something for him.
Yeah.
And, you know, after years later, we found out he felt the same, and we sort of like kind of had like, you know, a little crush on each other, but we were just friends. Like we met on that set and sort of kept in touch. And he came to New York like once or twice a year, and we would like keep in touch on like email, text. And back then I think it was Skype. So we would maybe like Skype here and there. But what struck me about him when I met him was sort of his creativity, his point of view. I was very fascinated with his taste, his aesthetic, his style. And, you know, our friendship we really bonded over having creative conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And then years later, we both ended up being single at the same time, and it just naturally progressed.
That's like all it takes.
Yeah.
Did you feel like because you had this friendship before that you didn't have to do any of the like kind of rules that you might do when you're first meeting someone, like, you know, don't sleep with them too soon, or don't like this, or don't call, like, because you had this foundation? Or do you feel like you still kind of played it cool a little bit?
No, I definitely, I had rules. And then as soon as we got together, the rules were completely out the door. I think it was because we knew each other, and also because, you know, the conversation that we had, you know, post getting together, it was like, I really want to be with you. It was like no question. It wasn't any uncertainty. We both felt extremely, smitten and taken with each other. But also, it was deeper than the surface level of just attraction, because we'd known each other for so long. So we had cemented this friendship and an understanding of each other, and I think that really helped. I think if we had met as strangers, we probably would have felt the same, like romantically, and but I think having that deeper connection really made the difference.
Totally. Well, like, how soon into getting together did you discuss like what kind of family life that you guys would want? Like, if you were on the same page about kids and things like that, or did you kind of know that he was?
I think I don't know if we ever had a conversation about it. Maybe. I think for me, like having gotten to that level of just like knowing immediately that this was my person, I was certain that I wanted to build a family and have children. And I feel like we might have had the conversation here and there. But I don't even know if it was like a real direct conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, let's talk about your relationship before kids and after kids, because that's kind of where I'm at too. So I'm so curious. How, if at all, did it change between you and your husband? Like your dynamic, maybe in the beginning it changed a little. Now it's like different and more like it was, or.
Yeah. It's funny. I feel like prior to having kids, and now that I have kids, I realize that the experience of being child-free or childless is it's very self-oriented, and not in a dismissive or rude way. Like, I mean, I'll speak for myself. It was just very much about me and focused on, just very me-oriented. And I think after having children, because even with a partner, you still sort of like, you're thinking about how to keep a balance between yourself and this other person.
Right.
But I think once you have children and you're becoming a caretaker for another, sorry, I'm like staring right at that. Is that okay?
No, yeah, of course. No, I was like, who is speaking up?
Oh, okay. So I feel like, with me now having children, it's like, you realize how much of yourself has to go to these little people. And, it's interesting because even, I birthed vaginally, I'm breastfeeding. And prior to all of those things, I was, this is my body. And like, these are my parts. They're for intimacy and for myself. And now it's like, no, this is like the area of where I birthed life. And this is now how I sustain this life, and it's really interesting. It took me some time to sort of keep that balance or figure out that balance of like, my body is mine, my body I share with my partner, but also I share with my children.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of moms might identify with the fact of like, having moments where you're touched out, like having so many people touch you or need you, like having a baby, like holding the baby needs you to rock it or, put them to sleep, or just, there's so much of your physical, emotional, psychological, mental that is now having to be divided. And it took me time to sort of figure out the balance, but not that long. I think I am the type of person that I like to problem solve or figure it out, because I know that, for me, if I wait too long on something, I'll get used to like the routine of what it is. So for me, it was important to figure out that balance, which now with the first, it was sort of an easier a route. But I think now with two, it's also challenging, because now your brain is like, I mean, at least for me, my brain is like overwhelmed with like all the things of like school and doctor's appointments and this and that. So it's like, having a moment, because, intimacy is physical, but it's also mental, it's emotional.
Right.
So I'm, learning how to like release certain parts of my body and brain and heart that are being occupied with other things to still connect. But it's been a natural transition, I would say.
Yeah. It's hard. Like, I feel like right now, like we're very much in the newborn stage, but I can already see that we're starting to kind of talk about like schedule and like, things that have to do like not the deeper conversations that we might have had before. Like we're like, oh, did this happen or did you get this? And I'm sure that even like increases when you have toddlers who you actually are making their schedules.
Right.
And we're definitely in a phase where like we're talking about this baby like 90% of the time.
Right.
So we have to like shut that off. And we just started having sex again, which is like, it's crazy. I mean, whether you deliver vaginally or have a C-section, it's still like you are like, it feels like, not feels like, but like it's as if you were a different person like before the baby, and then after it's like a new sex. It's like not like losing your virginity, but it's like a different, it's similar almost, I'd imagine. Yeah. Because it's just like, I have to relearn like what I want and what feels good because it might be different now what feels good.
Yeah.
So it's wild. It's just balancing it all. I mean, you seem like you do such a great job. And I want to talk about your labor and delivery. The first time you had mentioned the first baby that you had this plan of having a natural birth, which I think you did, but that things didn't exactly go to plan.
Right. So, and so I think also for the record, we should probably say, because all births are natural, right?
Exactly.
Which I'm learning,
exactly.
right? All births are natural.
I know. I get in trouble for that too. I'm learning like all births are natural and pumping is breastfeeding.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes. I didn't know that. I learned. So that's something new.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. We all want to be respectful of our fellow mamas who are also on the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, for my first, I had reached out to a midwife duo, which I was excited about having like a home birth. That was my idea. Also, it was during COVID. It was 2020 when, I mean, at that time I was going to my doctor's appointments alone and, you couldn't have someone with you. And then if you came into the waiting area, you couldn't sit down or touch anything. You had to stand and wait. So I was in that phase, but also, the home birth was really like me wanting to feel connected into my space, because what I learned about birth, a lot of it is that, I don't know. I mean, this is what I personally learned, and it's not shaming anyone, but being at home is sort of like an ultimate experience because you're able to relax. And I think what I learned was that a lot of the experience of labor is that you need to relax into it. Like you need to feel safe. Like the way that animals birth, often they will go into a secret hidden area away from people. They need to feel like they're safe in order to release this child or children or litter or whatever the animals have. But, in the same for us, it's like we need to feel safe and supportive, and we need to sort of figure out our own way of birthing. And I think, that was my intention. I'd also watched The Business of Being Born.
Oh my God, yeah.
And so that really also altered me. And so, so I had a midwife duo, I had a doula, and labor for me started early in the morning. I woke up and had the urge to just stand up, and I stood up and my water broke, and I was like so excited. I was like thrilled beyond belief. I was like not even thinking about pain or like any sort of mishap. I was just excited. And
how pregnant were you?
I was 2 days early than my due date. Yeah.
Okay, got you.
And so I was very excited. My husband was working from home at the time, and he was like, yeah, like we were all like just like giddy. And it's so funny because we texted our midwives and our doula, and they sort of told me later on, they were like, we were certain you were going to have such a laid back birth because you followed all of the rules. They had me on a diet. It wasn't a diet to like stay skinny or anything. They were just the midwives I had were like, in your third trimester, you will gain more weight. The baby will gain more weight in this phase. And it's really important to like stick to a strict diet of like no sugar, no French fries, like things that you probably are craving and want and think that you should have access to eating. They were like, don't do it. They were like pushing out a 10-pound baby versus a 6 or 7-pound baby is different. And they were like, of course, it wasn't a shame situation. It was just like from the aspect of get your calories in and feed yourself for sure, but be careful of where you're getting those calories.
That's so interesting because I didn't realize just you eating like unhealthy foods makes your baby fatter.
Potentially, yes. So based off of their, their explanation, I stuck to the diet. I ate whole foods, not like fried or, didn't eat ice cream, which was the hardest part. Yeah. And then I also did all of the stretches and all of the things. And they were like, oh, we were certain your labor would be like super easy. And then after my water broke, I went straight into back labor. And for a lot of people who experience back labor, it's the it's the indication that the baby isn't in the right position. So I guess we were just sort of hoping that baby would turn, but it was like from the minute my water broke, I went into back pain, and it lasted for, I want to say 26 hours at home laboring.
How do you deal with the pain when you're not getting an epidural?
So I had this lovely doula, Jenny Rebecca. She came over and she basically was massaging me. She had me in the shower, putting hot water, cold water, like a variation of things. My husband was massaging me. I was in so much pain I couldn't eat. And I want whoever's listening, please just watch the whole interview, because I wouldn't want them to see this clip of like, it was so much pain, because there is a silver lining to everything. So yes, it was like just unbearable pain. It was interesting because I feel like I didn't realize how mental the experience was. I think I was planning for such a physical experience that I didn't realize it was so mental. And throughout the experience, I just kept going into my head, and I somehow clung to the idea that the only way out is through. So like letting the pain hit me instead of trying to get out of the pain. Like there was no getting out of it.
Right, of course.
So it was almost like letting these waves of discomfort sort of like hit me, and then being like figuring out ways to like work through it. But I really think my doula and my husband did an exceptional job of like...
Yeah, well, if the baby was in the wrong position, how did they get out?
Well, the story continues.
Yeah.
The midwives came the next day. We inflated a pool. I was ready to go. I was like ready to push. And, I start pushing, and there's, they see the baby's head and they're like, okay, but nothing's happening. Like there wasn't much movement. It was like pushing and then baby being sucked right back in. And so, they weren't sure if maybe there was like the umbilical cord was tangled or anything, but the heart rate was fine. Everything was, smooth sailing. But towards the 26th hour, they were like, okay, so we don't know what's going on. We can continue, or you can transfer to the hospital where we have like a midwife that we know that can help. And I was like, I'm just going to transfer.
Yeah.
At that point, I was like, mentally, I was like, I will do this myself. I was like, I don't know what's going on and I need to figure it out, and I will do it myself. And I remember thinking like, oh, I don't want my doula to come. I don't want anyone to come. Everyone's going to hold me back. I'm going to do this on my own. And thankfully my doula came. She's this wonderful, sweet, angelic spirit who was just so soft-spoken that I went into like my very like independent tourist self, and I was like, I'll do this myself, and I don't need anyone who's too nice to help me. And thank God she came, because she really advocated for me at the hospital. Like when push came to shove, no pun intended or pun intended, she was really there and she advocated for me. And I will say on a side note, I would never birth again without a doula. And I highly recommend to anyone and everyone, if you have a home birth or a hospital birth, like have a doula. They are your person. They are meant to like take care of you and be there for you and be all the things, because also expecting your partner, if you have a partner, to be the one to do all those things after, living a whole life of never having to be in that experience. Right. It's a lot to sort of ask of someone. But anyway, we go to the hospital and they're like, oh, the baby's head's right there. Let's just keep pushing. And I keep pushing and nothing's happening. And then they're like, oh, we need to get a vacuum. And then they vacuum. And then they're like, oh, we need to cut. They cut me. And, it was a journey that I didn't expect. And I think in hindsight, I don't wish, but it would have been nice if I had prepared myself also for the unknown. Because I think a lot of times, especially, us women, we have an idea of what we want. I think anyone does, right? You have a vision and you think it'll go the way that, or close to the way that you planned. And often it doesn't. But I think ultimately I've also come to the understanding that, you know, it's my experience, but it's also another person who's come into this world.
Right.
And they sort of have ownership of also their journey.
True.
And so kind of respecting how they come into this world.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love what you said about a doula, but I have to caveat that with we had a doula and she wasn't the best doula.
Oh.
But I'm sure you did a lot of research around your doula. And this is my biggest regret, and if you're going to have a doula, you absolutely should, but call her references or something.
So what was the situation with her?
She, like, without spending too much time on it, she just wasn't, again, like, it wasn't her fault because things went so in a different direction. And like when you're at that point, when you're having when you're going towards having a C-section, like there's really not much she could have done. But she did not, like, she was great in the appointments before we actually, you know, I labored. And then once we were like, you know, it was go time, she was not as great and like was leaving to get like food for herself.
No,
like,
okay.
I was like, this is
no.
crazy.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So that is a great caveat because the doulas that I had, my first was Jenny Rebecca, my second was Gail, both incredible, wonderful human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Jenny Rebecca, I didn't eat for the 30 plus hours that I was laboring. I couldn't. I was in so much pain. I couldn't take a sip of water. I couldn't eat anything. I was in that much pain. And neither did she. She didn't get to eat or sleep for that entire period. Neither did my
she was
husband.
just by your side.
Yeah, completely.
That's
and
amazing.
yeah, it is important to have
Mm-hmm.
the right experienced doula for sure.
Definitely. And then your second, you just had another girl semi-recently.
Yes.
How old is she now?
September, so 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how was that different and better, you said?
Yeah, it's funny because when I was in the hospital with my first and I was like getting stitches and I was like, what is going on? The midwife who was stitching me was like, don't worry, your second will come faster. And everyone's like in that interim was basically saying the same thing. The doctors, the midwives, our doula, it was like, oh yeah, your second will come faster. I mean, I've heard situations where it's not the case, so we can't say that like for sure. But for my second, I again woke up at like 6:30 in the morning and was like, I am having a pain that I haven't felt before. It wasn't a cramp. It wasn't like like a Hicks.
Braxton
Hicks, yeah. And so it felt different. And weirdly, I was excited again because I was like, oh, my first was back labor. Maybe I'll experience what the other labor is like. And it immediately was like hitting me like huge waves of like, during my contractions of discomfort, pain, whatever.
Of the other labor.
Yeah. And so this time around, we had birthed with ULA, which is
Yes, I've heard of them.
Yeah, so they are a midwife, OB/GYN practice. They birth at Mount Sinai West. Yeah. And so it was sort of our idea of like, I still wanted a home birth. My husband felt more comfortable being in a hospital setting, but also he comes from Denmark. So their whole, healthcare system is different.
Mm-hmm.
But so it seemed like a good bridge between the two of like having this like holistic experience and a medical experience. So we called we called ULA and they're like, okay, great. Like just keep us posted. Called our doula and, it was like 7 a.m. and I was like, let me eat something because last time I didn't eat a single thing. And I know this is like a triathlon. You need your energy.
Yeah.
You need to eat. So I ate a whole bunch of yogurt and granola and made my way out the door. I had to get in an Uber because, this is what I knew that like if I waited too long, we were going to hit traffic. And New York traffic on a Friday morning was not what I wanted to be stuck in.
Especially when you're that pregnant, like that hurts.
Yes. So we got into an Uber and it was funny because my husband and I kept thinking like, oh, when everything happens, I hope that, when we're on our way to the hospital, we get an Uber driver who is a parent. Because often when I was pregnant or we travel with our toddler, we're met with like all kinds of people like who work somewhere or who are drivers or whatever. And they have kids also. So you can connect with them on that. So we were like, oh, hopefully it's like a dad or a mom. And then we go downstairs to the car and it's like a kid who looks like he's just turned 22 and he looked so nervous. He was like, what is going on? He was so scared. And out of nowhere, I just threw up. Everything I'd eaten, I just threw up immediately outside. And then I got in the car. It wasn't too bad of traffic. We got to the hospital and I was just like done. I was like, we need to get this baby out. I'm like ready to go. Like I felt ready to go, and then realized that when they had done the check when I arrived, they were like, oh, you're 8 centimeters. Like you're really ready to go. And so we went right into the room. My doula arrived and she was just, there. What I learned during labor is that for me, I need someone to talk me through it. I'm like, talk to me like a coach. Tell me that I can do this. I can handle this. That's ultimately, I think, the thing that really got me through it. And also physical touch, which is funny because in real life, I'm like, I don't want people to touch me.
Yeah.
But during labor, I was like, I need touch. I need connection. I need to feel safe. And, also as a woman of color giving birth, there was also this element of fear. And I kept asking my doula to tell me I was safe because I was, it's definitely an unknown. And it's a concern for our community. For any woman, I think you might think of the worst, but, specifically with the statistics of Black and brown women in this country. But so it's 6 a.m. it started, and by noon, baby was born. And
Amazing.
It was, compared to the first, it was a very short labor.
Yeah.
I pushed, I think, for 30 minutes. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. That is like a dream birth scenario. Like my idea was like show up at the hospital already, 8 centimeters. Let's go.
Yeah.
I love that. And you have been breastfeeding. You're, I think, back working. You're doing gigs, and you're, bringing your daughter, breastfeeding her, and going to work. Like, how are you doing all of this? It's amazing.
Thank you. I feel like I hope that it doesn't look too amazing for others, because I don't like the idea that we see, especially, it's normal, right? We see other people, anyone living their life, and we're like, oh, they have such a nice life. Everything's so easy. And we all get caught up in it, no matter how much we know that like their life has challenges and issues like everyone else. I think I also don't want other moms out there to see my life and think, wow, it's like super, she has it under control, because I feel like for the most part, it never feels like it.
Right.
It's always sort of like rolling with the punches, which is not where I ever feel my most confident. Like for me, I like a plan. I like to like, envision like what's going to happen. And then so often it's like morning of and day of, it's like, nope, everything you planned is out the door. I, took a trip with the baby for a job I had done. It was a really big job in Las Vegas, and I had an amazing opportunity to DJ for a big brand. And I was like, okay, I need to take the baby. I had packed everything, and I never forget anything, but I forgot my wallet. I forgot like so many things for this trip. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm just winging it. And that's not even to say that like, that's like, oh, how terrible. It's just to give you an idea of like things that look like on the surface, I'm like, everything's easy and breezy, and it's not fully, but I'm also fortunate to work with clients who are understanding of my situation. Yeah. And so, for the 2 of my jobs, one of them I had to pump. I was like, I need to like just run out and pump while I'm meant to be DJing. And then another set, I was like breastfeeding basically in between. And so I think I'm very fortunate, but I do want others to know that it comes with its own challenges. Yeah,
of course. And then real quick, because I know that we're running out of time, you had mentioned earlier when we were talking your collab with Air Jordan. You were the first woman to have a collab with the brand. How did that happen? Like, that is so cool. And I guess with that being kind of the last question, like, what advice do you have for women who want to do something like that?
Yeah. So yeah, in 2011, I want to say it had come out, or 2010. Basically, in 2009, I'd had a big birthday party. And prior to that, my career was very much into directing music videos. I had sort of created a name for myself from having a great circle of creative friends who I collaborated with. I had directed for Kendrick Lamar and Kid Cudi, Solange. I also had a blog at that time, so it was really like a way to like share my adventures and share my interests. And through my blog, pre-social media, it was like a way for me to connect with a big community of people like myself. So whereas social media now, it's sort of like we all connect because we like someone's photos, or we like how they take a photo, but my blog from my perspective was people around the world who were creatives who identified with me, and I also somehow identified with them. It was sort of like it wasn't a big community as now, right? Like everyone's into sneakers, everyone's into streetwear, everyone's into the same things. But back then it was a smaller community.
Totally.
And through that I was able to like create this like public platform. I was sharing myself. People were connecting with me. I had a fan base of people who I wouldn't call fans, but just, again, people who identified with me and that we connected.
Like-minded people.
Right. And so I had this big birthday party in 2009. And, for my birthday cake, I wanted a giant Air Jordan 3. That was my favorite sneaker. And I was like, oh, this is going to be my birthday cake. I'm excited. So I had this big birthday cake. It's gorgeous. Jordan 3 sneaker cake, and it got a lot of press. I think like Hypebeast had posted it, like a lot of the streetwear blogs, sneaker blogs. And a few weeks later I'd run into a friend that I knew who had previously worked at another sneaker brand. His name is Astor Chambers, incredible human being. And he and I were chatting, and he was like, oh, I'm working at Brand Jordan. And I was like, oh, did you see my Jordan cake? Like I had just had it. And he's like, oh, that's right. You're like weirdly obsessed with Jordans. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, wow. He's like, you should design a Jordan. I'm at Jordan. We should make it happen. And I was like, yeah, okay, that would be amazing. But, in business, often we have these like surface conversations, like, yeah, we'll do lunch. We'll,
Right, of
and
course.
I didn't think anything of it. But the next day we were really like chatting about it on the phone, discussing the direction of, designing an Air Jordan 2, which was so exciting. And that's basically how it happened. I think for advice for anyone who wants to do that, I think when I had done it, it was sort of unprecedented. It hadn't been done in the way that it was done. I think they had never, I'm just assuming they hadn't collaborated with someone that was like a non-athlete, a woman before. And there wasn't much of a system of how to support that. But now it's like so amazing. We have so many women who are designing Jordans, designing sneakers, period. And so I think the opportunities are there. And I think it's just a matter of like exhibiting like your voice, your stance in the community, if it's authentic, if it's natural and real. And I think it's wildly possible for that, for anything, just being authentic about your connection to whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, I agree, because more eyes are like, more people are watching, because people can find you on like Instagram, on TikTok, like people can see you. So like if you really love something, talk about it all the time. You never know, like the brand could be watching.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, it was so nice chatting with you. Can you leave
too.
us with a quote? I know you just gave us a piece of advice, but we usually end with a quote or piece of advice, just something that has helped you throughout the years. Maybe it's like something that you go back to. Maybe it's something from like a children's book, because you're reading a lot of them these days. I personally love my children's books.
Yeah, same. I think I'm at this point, I'm like really focused on manifestation. And I think, if you can think it, you can be it. If you can see it, you can be it. I think that's a really powerful thing. And being wise, with that comes being wise about language and reframing. So, speaking about things in a positive way, no matter how toxic or challenging the experience might have been, just like reframing and reworking your language. I think that's like the major steps into manifestation. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Vashtie.
Thank you.
Where can everyone find you, follow you?
At Vashtie on Instagram and Threads, I want to say. I'm somewhere on TikTok, but I don't fully know that one. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.